Good evening, I'm Alex Truth.
And I'm Maya Clarity. Welcome to Truth Report. Tonight we're examining 3 corporate power plays that reveal how algorithms, currency, and billionaire ego are reshaping global markets and threatening democracy itself.
We'll take you inside China's antitrust probe into Trip.com, where pricing algorithms have turned a travel platform into something far more dangerous. We'll show you how Malaysia's currency strength is squeezing the world's largest glove manufacturers. And we'll expose Elon Musk's attempted digital coup in Brazil.
These aren't isolated incidents. They're connected by a common thread: corporate power operating beyond democratic accountability. By the end of this hour, you'll see the pattern clearly.
Let's start in China, where on January 14th, the State Administration for Market Regulation launched an investigation that should concern anyone who books travel online.
The target is Trip.com, one of the world's largest travel platforms. The allegations? Abusing dominant market position through monopolistic practices. But the real story is far more disturbing than generic antitrust language suggests.
According to reporting from the South China Morning Post, Chinese regulators are zeroing in on Trip.com's use of sophisticated pricing algorithms. We're not talking about simple dynamic pricing here, Maya. We're talking about algorithm-driven price discrimination that targets individual consumers.
And here's what makes this particularly insidious. The Yunnan Provincial Tourism Homestay Industry Association issued a statement last November condemning Trip.com for what they called unfair exclusivity enforcement and unilateral commission increases. Hotel operators were being squeezed, but they couldn't walk away.
Brian Linden, a hotel operator quoted in the investigation, put it perfectly: Trip.com remains essential because they are so large and they're controlling access to so many travelers. That's not a market position. That's a stranglehold.
Let's talk numbers, because the scale here is breathtaking. According to analyst BNCU, Trip.com's net income for the first 3 quarters of 2025 reached 29.1 billion yuan, that's $4.1 billion. Want to know what that equals? The combined profit of approximately 1,600 hotels in Beijing, which together made just 1.2 billion yuan.
One platform is extracting more value than 1,600 hotels combined. That's not competition. That's extraction. And the mechanism is algorithmic control over pricing and market access.
The specific allegations detail forced exclusivity clauses requiring merchants to sell exclusively on the platform, rising commissions imposed without negotiation, and pricing algorithms designed to control market behavior. This is what analyst Alberto Vetteretti meant when he said regulators are recognizing that Trip.com is no longer just matching buyers and sellers but effectively deciding how an industry functions.
Now, context matters here. Some observers are comparing this to China's broad tech crackdown in 2021, when regulators went after Alibaba, Didi, and the private tutoring industry simultaneously. But Vetteretti calls this a relatively isolated case, yet one that might precipitate others.
I think that phrase "might precipitate others" is key. Because what's happening with Trip.com isn't unique to China or to travel platforms. The business model: use algorithms to achieve market dominance, then leverage that dominance to extract value from both consumers and vendors, is global.
Think about Uber, DoorDash, Amazon Marketplace. The same dynamic plays out across industries. The platform becomes indispensable, the algorithms become opaque, and suddenly you're not participating in a market, you're subject to algorithmic rule.
And here's the uncomfortable truth that Western media often misses when covering Chinese tech regulation: sometimes the authoritarians get it right about corporate power. Trip.com secured its position as the primary gateway for domestic flights and hotel bookings in China, then used that position to reshape the entire tourism industry to its benefit.
The regulatory logic, as Vetteretti explained, shifts when a platform crosses that line. You're no longer dealing with market regulation. You're dealing with power regulation. And that brings us to our second story, where corporate power meets macroeconomic forces.
Malaysia is home to the world's largest latex glove manufacturers. During the pandemic, these companies were printing money. Now they're bleeding it, and the reason reveals everything wrong with how we've structured global supply chains.
The Malaysian ringgit has climbed over 10% against the dollar in the past year, according to South China Morning Post reporting. It's Asia's best-performing currency. That sounds like good news, right? Strong currency, strong economy.
Except over 90% of glove manufacturers' sales are dollar-denominated. When they convert those dollars back to ringgit to pay workers and shareholders, the strong currency shreds their profit margins. Let's look at the carnage.
Top Glove, the world's largest glove maker, saw first-quarter sales volume grow 17% year-on-year. But average selling prices fell 11% purely due to currency impact. That's growth without profit.
Hartaliga Holdings reported first-half earnings declined 24% year-on-year. Kananga Investment Bank cut their net profit forecast by 12% specifically because of currency headwinds.
Supermax had it worst. Their first-quarter losses more than doubled to 134.6 million ringgit, that's $33.6 million. Their stock fell nearly 7% after the announcement.
Now, Tek Yong Yang, a professor at the University of Reading Malaysia, explained the macroeconomic tension perfectly. While ringgit strength lowers systemic risk at the macro level, it comes at the expense of exporter earnings.
Translation: what's good for Malaysia's economy overall is devastating for companies that built their business model on currency arbitrage. They manufacture in ringgit, sell in dollars, and pocket the difference. When that difference shrinks, the model collapses.
And here's where this connects to broader issues of corporate power and economic sovereignty. These glove manufacturers aren't suffering because they make bad products or because demand dropped. They're suffering because they structured their entire business around exploiting currency differentials.
Chun Sung-ong from CMB Securities said they expect the persistent softness of the US dollar versus the ringgit to adversely impact glove makers' profitability. But notice what's not being discussed: whether these companies should have built more resilient business models in the first place.
The reporting notes that palm oil companies in Malaysia use currency hedging successfully. But glove makers operate on just-in-time contracting cycles with thin operating margins, which limits their ability to hold large dollar reserves for hedging.
So they chose high-volume, low-margin production optimized for maximum currency extraction. Now that the extraction mechanism is failing, they're exposed. And this matters because these same dynamics play out across global manufacturing.
Companies chase the lowest labor costs, the weakest environmental regulations, the most favorable currency arbitrage. They build supply chains optimized for quarterly profits, not resilience. Then when macroeconomic conditions shift, they demand bailouts or threaten to relocate.
The glove manufacturers also face excess capacity, intense overseas competition, and price-sensitive customers. These are structural problems that currency fluctuations merely expose. The business model was always fragile.
And that fragility has consequences for workers, for Malaysian economic sovereignty, and for global supply chain security. Remember when we couldn't get PPE during early pandemic? These are the companies that were supposed to solve that. Instead, they're optimized for profit extraction, not public health.
Which brings us to our main story tonight. Because if you want to see corporate power operating completely beyond democratic accountability, if you want to understand what happens when a billionaire decides his platform isn't subject to national law, look at what Elon Musk did in Brazil.
And I want to be clear about something from the start: this is not a free speech story. This is a story about a foreign billionaire attempting to use digital infrastructure to undermine a democratic government that refused to let his platform aid coup plotters.
On August 31, 2024, Brazil banned X, Musk's social media platform, cutting off 22 million Brazilian users overnight. Within 3 days, 2 million of them migrated to Blue Sky. But the ban wasn't sudden. It was the culmination of Musk's 18-month escalation against Brazil's Supreme Court.
Let's establish the timeline, because the details matter. In March 2019, Justice Alexander de Moraes was granted supervisory authority over federal investigations into threats against the judiciary. This followed a 2018 election fraud campaign that included coordinated attacks on democratic institutions.
In April 2023, dozens of neo-Nazi cells began targeting children on social media, attempting to incite school massacres on April 20, Hitler's birthday. Brazilian authorities ordered these accounts removed. X initially resisted.
Think about that. Court orders to deplatform people literally planning to murder children, and X resisted compliance. That's not defending free speech. That's facilitating terrorism.
X also refused to remove accounts of PCC cocaine trafficking organization leaders when ordered to provide data during investigations. They rejected orders related to digital militias spreading election fraud claims. The pattern was consistent: Brazilian courts would order action, X would refuse.
Then came the January 8, 2023 coup attempt. Crowds invaded Brazil's National Congress and Supreme Court. Court documents later found in Justice Minister Anderson Torres' home detailed plans to pressure President Lula into declaring a state of siege. Electrical towers were sabotaged nationwide in coordinated attacks.
This wasn't spontaneous protest. This was organized insurrection. And the digital infrastructure that organized it included X accounts that Brazilian authorities had been trying to get removed for months.
In April 2024, Justice de Moraes ordered X included in the obstruction of justice investigation related to the coup attempt. Musk's response? On April 7, he announced X would stop obeying Brazilian court orders entirely.
Not, we disagree with these orders. Not, we're appealing through proper channels. He simply declared that his platform was above Brazilian law. That's not a legal position. That's an assertion of digital sovereignty.
By August 17, Musk had fired 40 workers and closed X's Brazilian offices. This directly violated telecommunications law requiring companies operating in Brazil to maintain legal representation. Musk pledged to keep the platform running anyway.
On August 29, Justice de Moraes issued a 24-hour deadline: appoint a legal representative or face nationwide ban. X missed the deadline. On September 2, Brazil's Supreme Court upheld the ban 5-0 in the first working group.
And here's what makes Musk's defiance particularly disturbing. The accounts he reinstated in deliberate violation of court orders included Alan dos Santos, a fugitive hiding in the United States; Sarah Geronimi, known as Sarah Winter, a paramilitary leader who launched fireworks at the Supreme Court building for 3 days; Daniel Silveira, a congressman arrested for repeatedly urging military coup.
These weren't political dissidents. These were people under investigation or charged with crimes ranging from inciting violence to attempting to overthrow the government. And Musk positioned himself as their defender.
Now, reporting from Brasil Wire reveals the deeper context. Musk's business interests in Brazil are substantial. Starlink, his satellite internet company, had 8 billion reais in government contracts under review. He had lithium supply deals with Sigma Lithium. The Bolsonaro government had offered him access to the Alcântara space base.
And there are allegations that illegal Amazon miners, who operate outside Brazilian law, devastate indigenous lands, and export resources without paying taxes, were using Starlink to coordinate operations. So when de Moraes started investigating, Musk's business empire came into conflict with Brazilian sovereignty.
Enter Michael Schellenberger and the Twitter Files Brazil. According to Brasil Wire's analysis, Schellenberger cherry-picked information, misrepresented Brazilian law, and committed what they call blatant journalistic malpractice to frame legitimate law enforcement as censorship.
Specifically, Schellenberger presented a São Paulo police demand for information about PCC gang leaders as a threat to arrest Twitter's lawyer. That's not what the documents showed. But the narrative served Musk's purposes: paint himself as free speech defender, paint Brazilian courts as authoritarian.
The propaganda worked on parts of the American right. In March 2024, congressional delegations led by Eduardo Bolsonaro, former President Jair Bolsonaro's son, attempted to convince Republicans to approve sanctions against Brazil. Think about that, a Brazilian political family asking the United States to sanction their own country to protect Elon Musk's business interests.
Eduardo Bolsonaro, by the way, attended the January 6th War Council in Washington before the Capitol attack. He recorded YouTube videos calling for military coup against Brazil's Supreme Court that reportedly got hundreds of thousands of views. The connections aren't subtle.
What Musk attempted in Brazil wasn't just about one billionaire's ego or one platform's policies. It was about whether digital infrastructure can be weaponized to undermine democratic governance when that governance conflicts with corporate interests.
Brazilian Minister Flávio Dino stated it plainly: a foreign company cannot operate in national territory and expect to impose its own view on which laws it believes are valid or should be enforced. That's not controversial. That's basic sovereignty.
But here's what terrifies me about this story. Musk came very close to succeeding. He mobilized international pressure, framed legitimate law enforcement as authoritarianism, positioned coup plotters as free speech martyrs, and nearly forced Brazil to choose between digital connectivity and rule of law.
The Supreme Court froze Starlink assets to enforce 9 million reais in accumulated fines. Musk reportedly sought U.S. Embassy intervention to overturn Supreme Court rulings. He was treating Brazil as a banana republic whose laws existed at his pleasure.
And the only reason Brazil could resist is that they had alternatives. Users migrated to Blue Sky. The ban actually worked. But imagine a country more dependent on a single platform, with fewer alternatives, facing the same pressure.
That's the future these 3 stories point toward. Let's connect them, because the pattern is everything.
In China, Trip.com used algorithmic control to move beyond being a platform to being the de facto regulator of an entire industry. In Malaysia, glove manufacturers built fragile empires on currency extraction and now demand protection when macroeconomics shift. In Brazil, Musk declared his platform above national law.
The common thread? Corporate power that operates beyond democratic accountability. Platforms that become infrastructure. Business models that optimize for extraction rather than value creation. Executives who treat national governments as obstacles rather than legitimate authorities.
And in each case, the corporate narrative frames accountability as overreach. China investigating algorithmic price discrimination becomes tech crackdown. Malaysia's currency strength becomes an unfair burden on manufacturers. Brazil enforcing its laws becomes censorship.
But flip the frame. Trip.com extracting more profit than 1,600 hotels combined isn't innovation, it's monopoly rent. Glove manufacturers demanding favorable conditions after building unsustainable business models isn't competitiveness, it's corporate welfare. Musk refusing to remove coup plotters' accounts isn't free speech, it's complicity.
These stories reveal how thoroughly corporations have captured the narrative around their own power. We're supposed to worry about strong currencies hurting exporters, not ask why exporters built business models dependent on weak currencies. We're supposed to debate whether tech regulation stifles innovation, not whether platforms should control entire industries.
And we're definitely supposed to accept that billionaires operating digital infrastructure have some kind of inherent right to decide which laws apply to them. That's not capitalism. That's not democracy. That's digital feudalism.
Brasil Wire made this point powerfully in their reporting. Musk's action should be viewed as a coup attempt. Not hyperbole, an actual attempt to use digital infrastructure to undermine a democratic government. And the scary part is how normal we've become to corporate power operating at that scale.
When Trip.com's algorithms decide which hotels survive, when currency traders determine which manufacturers stay solvent, when Musk decides which accounts spread coup propaganda, these aren't market outcomes. These are power relationships.
And power relationships require democratic oversight. That's what China is attempting with its antitrust probe, however imperfectly. That's what Brazil achieved by actually enforcing its laws against a billionaire who thought he was untouchable.
Malaysia's situation is more complex because currency policy operates at the macroeconomic level. But even there, the question isn't whether the ringgit should weaken to help exporters. The question is whether we've built a global system where manufactured fragility becomes an argument for public support.
These glove manufacturers employ thousands of workers. They provide essential products. But they also made choices about margin optimization, about currency exposure, about prioritizing quarterly returns over resilience. When those choices produce pain, who bears it? Workers or shareholders?
That's the distribution question at the heart of all three stories. When Trip.com extracts monopoly rents, travelers and hotels pay. When glove manufacturers face currency pressure, workers face layoffs while executives keep compensation packages. When Musk's platform aids coup plotters, Brazilian democracy pays the price.
And in each case, the corporate actors position themselves as victims. Trip.com faces regulatory uncertainty. Glove makers face unfair currency pressure. Musk faces censorship. The framing inverts the actual power relationship.
Which is why these stories matter beyond their immediate contexts. They're teaching us to see corporate power clearly, to recognize when platforms become governments, when business models become extraction schemes, when billionaires become would-be sovereigns.
Brazil showed that resistance is possible. They called Musk's bluff. They enforced their laws. They protected their democracy. And the sky didn't fall. X went offline, users found alternatives, life continued.
That's the lesson authoritarian corporate power doesn't want us learning. We're not as dependent as they claim. The platforms, the currency arbitrage, the algorithmic control, these are choices, not inevitabilities. Different choices are possible.
China's probe into Trip.com might be imperfect, might be politically motivated, might be authoritarian in implementation. But the core recognition that algorithmic platforms wielding this much power require oversight is correct.
And Malaysia's glove manufacturers will adapt or fail, but either way, the lesson stands. Building business models on extraction and fragility produces exactly the crises we're witnessing.
The question for democracies worldwide is whether we'll recognize these patterns before corporate power becomes truly unaccountable. Because that's the trajectory. Platforms controlling industries. Algorithms replacing regulation. Billionaires treating laws as suggestions.
Tonight we've shown you three fronts in that battle: China pushing back against algorithmic dominance, Malaysia grappling with the consequences of extraction-based manufacturing, and Brazil defending its sovereignty against digital colonialism.
Stay informed. Question corporate narratives. Recognize power relationships. And remember, when a platform says regulation threatens innovation, ask whose innovation and at what cost. When a manufacturer says currency pressure threatens jobs, ask whose jobs and whose profits. When a billionaire says enforcement threatens freedom, ask whose freedom and whose power.
The truth is usually found by following the money and mapping the power. That's what we do here, and that's what we'll keep doing.
I'm Maya Clarity.
I'm Alex Truth. Thanks for watching Truth Report.